The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Commander Zethkar sat in the witness chair, his forearms resting on the metal table before him. His crystalline skin caught the light from the ceiling panels, showing the deep scars that marked years of battle. Each scar told a story, but today he would only tell the ones that mattered most. The judges looked down at him from their high seats. 3 different alien species sat in judgment, their faces showing the cold expression of those who had never seen real war. They had called this meeting to discuss war crimes. They wanted to talk about the humans and what they had done during the Third Rim War. Zethkar had been waiting for this day for 2 years. 2 years since the war ended. 2 years since he had watched his human allies pack their ships and leave for their distant homeworld. 2 years of thinking about what he had seen and what it all meant. "Commander Zethkar," said Judge Veltar, her voice coming through the translator as a sharp whistle. She was from the Altarian system, where wars were fought with computers and mathematics. "You served alongside human forces during the conflict against the hegemony, is this correct?" "Yes," Zethkar replied. His own voice sounded strange through the machine, flatter than it should be. "I commanded the 47th Vorthik Infantry. We fought with the human 3rd Marine Division for 18 months. And during this time you witnessed actions that some consider to be war crimes?" Zethkar's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "War crimes, such simple words for such complicated things." "I witnessed war," he said finally. "Real war. Not the kind you study in books or simulate on computers. The kind where people die, screaming, and the living have to keep fighting anyway." Judge Nexori leaned forward. He was from the Nexari Collective, a species that fought in perfect formations with perfect timing. "We are here to determine if human combat methods violate galactic law. Please answer the question directly. You want direct answers?" Zethkar stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The guards near the door tensed, but he ignored them. "Fine, I will give you direct answers. But first, let me tell you about Lieutenant Jake Morrison." The judges exchanged glances. This was not how testimony usually went. Witnesses were supposed to answer questions, not tell stories, but something in Zethkar's voice made them wait. "Morrison was 24 years old," Zethkar continued. "Earth years, not standard galactic years. He had brown hair and green eyes and a scar on his chin from when he fell off his bicycle as a child. He told me that story while we were waiting for artillery to stop falling on our heads." Zethkar began to pace, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet room. "We were on Kepler 7, defending a supply depot. The hegemony had us surrounded. 50,000 of their soldiers against our 3,000. We had been fighting for 6 days without sleep, without proper food, without hope." He stopped and looked directly at Judge Veltar. "Your people would have surrendered on day 2. Your computer models would have said survival was impossible. But Morrison never looked at a computer model. He looked at his soldiers." The alien commander's voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. "On the 7th day, Morrison came to me with a plan. He wanted to take 12 humans and break through the enemy lines to reach our main base. 12 soldiers against 50,000. I told him it was suicide." "What did he say?" asked Judge Harquin, the 3rd member of the tribunal. He was the oldest, from a species that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. "He said that suicide was staying here and dying for nothing. He said that maybe 12 humans could not win against 50,000 enemies, but 12 humans could make those enemies pay a price they would never forget." Zethkar's crystalline skin flickered, a sign of deep emotion among his people. Then he asked me something that I still think about every day. The room was completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed to hum more quietly. He asked me if I wanted to come with them. Zethkar sat back down, his 4 hands folded in front of him. "I had been a soldier for 37 years. I had fought in 16 different wars. I had seen courage and cowardice, victory and defeat. But I had never seen anything like what those humans did that night." He paused, looking at each judge in turn. "Morrison's plan was simple. We would move through the enemy camp in the darkest hour before dawn. We would cause as much damage as possible and try to reach the communication tower to call for help. It was not a good plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it was the only plan we had. The alien veteran's voice became steady, like a teacher explaining a lesson. At 0300 hours, we began our assault. I expected the humans to be nervous, maybe? Afraid. They were about to attempt something that every military computer in the galaxy would call impossible. But they were not afraid. They were excited. Excited? Judge Nexori sounded confused. To face certain death? No, Zethkar said. To fight back. To stop running and hiding and start hurting the enemy? I learned something that night about human psychology. Humans are not afraid of dying. They are afraid of dying uselessly. Give them a chance to hurt their enemies, and they become the most dangerous creatures in the universe. He stood again and walked to the large window that showed the stars beyond. We moved through that camp like ghosts. Morrison had studied the enemy patrol patterns for 3 days. He knew exactly where every guard would be, exactly how long we had between rotations. But more than that, he understood something about the hegemony soldiers that our own intelligence had missed. Which was? They were overconfident. They had us trapped, outnumbered, and beaten. They thought we were finished. So they were not watching for an attack. They were planning our surrender ceremony? Zethkar turned back to face the tribunal. Morrison used their pride against them. The alien commander described how they had moved through the enemy camp, placing explosives on fuel dumps and communication equipment. The humans worked with a precision that amazed him. No wasted motion, no unnecessary noise, no hesitation. But then something went wrong, Zethkar continued. A guard changed his route early. He saw us near the ammunition storage. He started to raise his weapon to sound the alarm. What happened? Sergeant Lisa Adams killed him with her bare hands. Zethkar's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. She broke his neck before he could make a sound, but the way she did it, I had never seen anything like it. He began pacing again. Adams was small, even for a human. Maybe 60 kilograms? The guard was a hegemony heavy trooper, over 2 meters tall and twice her weight, but she moved like water, like music. One moment the guard was reaching for his alarm, the next moment he was dead on the ground. Then Adams looked at me and smiled. She actually smiled, like she had just solved a difficult puzzle instead of taking a life. That was when I began to understand what makes humans different from every other species in the galaxy. The judges waited for him to continue. They enjoy the work, Zethkar said simply. Not killing exactly, but solving the problem of how to defeat their enemies. They turn war into a game, a challenge to overcome. And they play that game better than anyone else I have ever seen. He sat down one final time, his 4 eyes fixed on Judge Harquin. We destroyed that ammunition dump. We took out their communication tower. We killed 43 guards without raising a single alarm. And then Morrison led us through 6 kilometers of hostile territory to reach our own lines. All 12 humans survived? All 12 humans survived. Plus one very confused Vorthok commander who was beginning to learn that the word impossible means something different to humans than it does to the rest of us. Zethkar leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. You want to know about war crimes? Morrison could have killed every sleeping soldier in that camp. Adams could have tortured the guards for information. They had the skill and the opportunity, but they did not. They took only what they needed to complete their mission and save their friends. The alien veteran sat back, his testimony for the day complete. Tomorrow I will tell you about Captain Ryan Tucker and what humans call endurance. But today, remember this. Lieutenant Jake Morrison broke every rule of civilized warfare that night. And because he did, 3,000 Allied soldiers lived to see another dawn. The courtroom remained silent as the judges considered his words. Outside the windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the small creatures who fought and died in their light. The second day of testimony began with the same quiet tension as the first. Commander Zethkar entered the courtroom carrying a small metal box. The judges watched as he placed it carefully on the witness table, then took his seat. His four arms moved slowly, like someone carrying a heavy weight that others could not see. "Commander," Judge Veltar began, "yesterday you spoke about Lieutenant Morrison and tactical operations. Today we want to discuss reports of human soldiers fighting beyond normal physical limits. Some witnesses claim humans continued combat operations for days without rest or medical treatment." Zethkar's crystalline skin flickered with what his people called memory light. "You want to know about human endurance? Very well. I will tell you about Titan Ridge and what I learned about the difference between surviving and living." He opened the small metal box and removed a piece of torn fabric. It was stained with something dark and old. This belonged to Captain Ryan Tucker. He gave it to me on the third day of the battle, just before he went to carry wounded soldiers through an artillery bombardment with 3 broken ribs. The alien commander held the fabric carefully, like it was made of something precious. Titan Ridge was supposed to be a simple defensive operation. Hold the high ground for 48 hours while the main fleet repositioned. Standard procedure. Except the hegemony threw everything they had at us. Judge Nexori leaned forward. "How many enemy forces?" Initial count was 12,000. By the end, we estimated 25,000 had passed through that battlefield. They kept sending reinforcements, wave after wave, because they could not believe that 800 humans and 400 of my soldiers could hold a position against such numbers. Zethkar stood and began his slow pacing around the witness area. The battle began at dawn on the first day. Tucker was commanding the eastern defensive line with Major Amy Collins holding the west. I was in the center with the artillery spotters. We expected a hard fight, but we expected it to end. "When did you realize it would not end?" "Hour 16. Tucker came to me covered in blood and dirt. His uniform was torn, his helmet was cracked, and he had not slept since the day before. But his eyes were still clear, still focused. He asked for more ammunition and medical supplies for his men. The alien veteran stopped walking and faced the tribunal. I told him that his soldiers needed rest, that they could not keep fighting at this pace. Tucker looked at me like I had said something funny. He said his men would rest when the enemy was dead or they were. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. "In my culture, we have cycles of combat and rest. Fight for 6 hours, rest for 2. It is how all civilized species conduct warfare. But humans do not have cycles, they have something else, which is purpose." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Tucker's soldiers were not fighting to hold a position. They were fighting to protect the evacuation ships that were taking civilian refugees to safety. 3 million people, mostly families and children, were depending on us to give them time to escape. Judge Harquin made a note on his tablet. "Continue. By hour 24, my own soldiers were collapsing from exhaustion. We had been rotating them in shifts, pulling them back for rest periods, but the humans would not rotate. They would not leave their positions even when ordered." Zethkar opened a compartment in his armor and pulled out another item. It was a small photograph, creased and faded. "This is Corporal Danny Wright, 19 years old. He held position 7 on the eastern line for 8 hours alone after his entire squad was killed." The judges passed the photograph between them. It showed a young human male with brown hair and a wide smile, wearing a dress uniform and standing next to an older human couple. Wright's position controlled the main approach to our artillery. If the enemy took it, they could destroy our guns and overrun the entire defense. When his squad leader was killed, Wright refused evacuation. He said someone had to hold the line. The alien commander's voice began to shake slightly. "I watched that boy through my field scopes for 8 hours. He cried the entire time, tears running down his face as he fired that heavy weapon. But he never stopped shooting, never stopped fighting, never stopped killing the enemies who tried to take his position." Judge Veltar looked uncomfortable. "A 19-year-old soldier crying in combat hardly seems like evidence of superior human ability." "You misunderstand," Zethkar said sharply. "Wright was crying because he was afraid, because he was alone. because he knew he was probably going to die, but fear did not stop him. Being alone did not stop him. Knowing he might die did not stop him. He cried and fought at the same time. The alien veteran sat back down, still holding the photograph. When we finally reached his position, Wright had eliminated 47 enemy soldiers, 47. His ammunition was almost gone. His weapon was overheating and he had taken shrapnel wounds in his shoulder and leg, but he was still firing. "What did you say to him?" I asked him why he did not retreat when his squad was killed, why he did not call for support, why he stayed alone in that position for so long. Zethkar looked at each judge. He said that someone had to do it, so it might as well be him. The silence in the courtroom stretched for several moments. But Wright was not the most remarkable thing I saw that day, Zethkar continued. That honor belongs to Major Amy Collins. He pulled out another item from his box. This one was a piece of metal, twisted and blackened by fire. Hour 36. Collins was leading a counterattack against a hegemony breakthrough on the western slope. A plasma grenade exploded near her position. The blast took her left arm off at the elbow. Judge Nex Ori made a small sound of distress. Even among warrior species, such injuries were usually fatal or permanently disabling. Collins wrapped the wound in her own shirt and continued commanding the attack for 12 more hours. With one arm and no medical treatment beyond what she could do for herself. Zethkar held up the piece of metal. This is part of the tourniquet she made from her equipment belt. Impossible. No one can function with such trauma. I have video recordings, Zethkar said simply. Collins not only functioned, she succeeded. Her counterattack pushed the enemy back 2 kilometers and secured the western approach. She gave tactical orders, coordinated air support, and personally led 3 separate charges against fortified positions. The alien commander stood again, but this time he did not pace. He stood perfectly still, like a statue. Hour 48. The evacuation ship signaled that the last refugees were clear. We had permission to withdraw. The battle was over. And did you withdraw? Tucker and Collins refused to leave until every wounded soldier was evacuated. It took another 6 hours to carry all the injured to the landing zones. Tucker carried men on his back while his own ribs were broken. Collins organized the evacuation with one arm while she was bleeding through makeshift bandages. Zethkar's skin flickered again with memory light. Hour 54. The last transport lifted off. We had held Titan Ridge for more than 2 full days against impossible odds. My soldiers were unconscious from exhaustion. But the humans were still alert, still ready to fight if needed. How is such endurance possible? The alien veteran looked directly at Judge Veltar. Because they choose it. Every hour, every minute, they choose to keep fighting. Not because they are programmed like machines or driven by instinct like animals. They choose, moment by moment, to endure whatever they must endure. He sat down and carefully placed all the items back in his metal box. You ask about war crimes. Collins could have abandoned the western line when she was injured. Wright could have retreated when his squad died. Tucker could have ordered a withdrawal when his men began falling from exhaustion, but they did not. Zethkar closed the box with a soft click. They stayed because other people needed them to stay. They fought because other people needed them to fight. They endured because other people needed them to endure. If that is a war crime, then I hope my own soldiers learn to be criminals. The judges sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Judge Harquin spoke. Tomorrow you will tell us about human psychological warfare? Tomorrow, Zethkar said, standing to leave, I will tell you about what happens when humans become angry, and why the entire galaxy should pray that never happens to them. He walked toward the door, carrying his small box of memories. At the threshold, he turned back one final time. Captain Tucker recovered from his injuries and returned to duty. 3 weeks later, Major Collins learned to fight with one arm and became one of the most effective commanders in human military history. Corporal Wright was promoted and trained other young soldiers until the war ended. And you, Commander, what did you learn? Zethkar's 4 eyes blinked slowly. I learned that humans do not fight because they are not afraid to die. They fight because they are not afraid to choose death over failure. There is a difference, and that difference changes everything. The courtroom door closed behind him with a soft sound, leaving the judges alone with their thoughts and the growing realization that they might not understand war as well as they believed. The third day brought storms to the space station where the tribunal was held. Rain struck the windows in heavy sheets, and thunder echoed through the metal corridors. Commander Zethkar sat in the witness chair, but today he had brought no box of memories. Today he carried only the weight of what he had seen. "Commander," Judge Veltar began, her voice more careful than before, "yesterday you spoke of human endurance. Today we must discuss more troubling reports. There are accounts of humans entering what appears to be a berserker state during combat, behavior that some consider war crimes." Zethkar looked at the storm outside for a long moment before answering. "You want to know about human fury, about what happens when they reach their breaking point." His crystalline skin was darker today, showing the deep blue color that his people displayed when remembering pain. "Very well. I will tell you about Sergeant Kevin Lopez and the Darkwater Base incident." Judge Nexori shifted uncomfortably. "The incident that resulted in the complete elimination of a hegemony facility? The incident where one human soldier did what an entire battalion could not do," Zethkar corrected. "But to understand what Lopez did, you must first understand what was done to him." The alien commander stood and walked to the window, watching the lightning flash across the dark sky. "Lopez commanded 3rd Platoon of Charlie Company. 36 humans under his direct command. Good soldiers, experienced fighters, people he had trained and led for 2 years. What happened to them? They were captured during a reconnaissance mission on hegemony-controlled territory. Intelligence failure. What should have been an empty supply depot was actually a major enemy base. Lopez's platoon was outnumbered and surrounded before they knew what was happening." Zethkar's 4 hands pressed against the window glass. "Standard galactic war conventions require prisoners to be treated humanely, fed, housed medical care, provided the hegemony had signed these conventions. They were supposed to follow them, but they did not. They executed Lopez's soldiers one by one, slowly, over the course of 6 days, and they broadcast the executions on all military frequencies, making sure that anyone listening could hear what was happening. The silence in the courtroom was complete except for the sound of rain against the windows. Lopez was on leave at the main base when it happened. He listened to every transmission, heard every scream, heard his soldiers calling his name as they died. By the 4th day he had stopped eating. By the 6th day he had stopped speaking to anyone." Judge Harquin leaned forward. "What did he do?" "He requested immediate transfer to combat operations. Any mission, any location, as long as it involved the enemy who had killed his people. Command tried to give him time to recover, to process what had happened. But Lopez said he did not want to recover, he wanted to work." Zethkar turned away from the window and faced the tribunal. "I was assigned to work with Lopez on intelligence gathering. The plan was simple. Infiltrate the base where his soldiers had died, gather information about enemy operations, and report back. Standard reconnaissance? But Lopez had other plans?" "Lopez never told me about other plans." For 3 days we moved through enemy territory toward Darkwater Base. He was professional, competent, focused. We avoided patrols, gathered intelligence, mapped defensive positions. Perfect soldier behavior. The alien commander began pacing again, but his movements were different today. Slower, more deliberate. On the 3rd night, we reached the base perimeter. I was preparing to begin electronic surveillance when Lopez asked me a question. What did he ask? He asked if I had ever lost soldiers under my command. If I had ever failed to protect people who trusted me to bring them home safely. Zethkar stopped pacing. I told him yes. Every commander loses soldiers. It is the nature of war. How did he respond? He said that he understood why some losses were necessary. Tactical requirements, impossible situations, enemy superiority. But he said that what happened to his platoon was not necessary. It was cruelty for the sake of cruelty. And he could not accept that. Zethkar sat down heavily, his forearms resting on the table. That was when Lopez told me the real reason he had volunteered for this mission. He was not here to gather intelligence. He was here to balance the books. Judge Veltar looked confused. Balance the books? Human expression? It means to make things equal, to ensure that actions have consequences. The alien veteran's voice grew very quiet. Lopez intended to kill everyone in that base, all of them, the same way they had killed his soldiers. Did you try to stop him? I tried to convince him to follow the original mission plan, to gather information and leave. I told him that revenge would not bring his soldiers back. Zethkar's skin flickered with memory light. Lopez said he was not trying to bring them back. He was trying to make sure that what happened to them never happened to anyone else. What did you do? I made a choice that I still question every day. I told Lopez that if he was determined to attack the base, I would provide overwatch and ensure his escape route remained clear, but I would not participate in the assault itself. Judge Nex Ori made a note on his tablet. You aided in what you knew would be a massacre? I aided a soldier who had been pushed beyond the limits of what any being should be asked to endure. Zethkar's voice was firm without apology. And I wanted to see what one human could do when all restraints were removed. The alien commander stood and walked to a different window, one that showed the space dock where human ships waited in the distance. Lopez entered that base at 0200 hours. I monitored his progress through thermal imaging and communication intercepts. What I witnessed changed my understanding of human nature forever. Describe what you saw. Lopez moved through that facility like something from a nightmare. Not rushing, not frantic, but systematic and precise. He disabled the communication systems first, then the power grid, then the backup generators. Within 30 minutes, the base was isolated and dark. Zethkar's reflection in the window showed his 4 eyes blinking slowly, remembering. Then he began hunting the guards. One by one, silently, using techniques I had never seen before, methods that seemed to come from some deep, ancient part of human nature. How many guards were there? 47 on duty that night. Within 2 hours, they were all dead. But Lopez had not just killed them quickly. He had made them afraid first, made them understand what was happening to them, made them experience the same terror his soldiers had felt. The judges exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was exactly the kind of behavior they were investigating. By 0400 hours, Lopez had reached the command center where the executions had taken place. The facility commander and his staff were barricaded inside, calling for help that would never come. Lopez had cut all their communications. Zethkar turned back to face the tribunal. I monitored their internal communications for the next 6 hours. Lopez did not simply attack them. He talked to them first, told them about each of his soldiers who had died, their names, their ages, their families back home. He made the enemy commander understand exactly who he had killed and why it mattered. Then what happened? Then Lopez methodically eliminated everyone in that command center. Not quickly, not efficiently, but in the same manner that his soldiers had been killed, slowly, deliberately, making sure they understood what was happening and why. Judge Veltar looked pale. How long did this take? 6 hours. The same amount of time that the executions of his platoon had taken. Zethkar sat back down, his movements careful and controlled. When I found Lopez 12 hours later, he was sitting in the facility's communications room, quietly cleaning his weapons. What was his mental state? Calm, focused, he asked if I had been able to gather the intelligence we came for. When I said yes, he nodded and asked if I was ready to return to base, as if nothing unusual had happened. The alien commander leaned forward, his 4 eyes fixed on Judge Harquin. You want to know about war crimes? Lopez had violated every rule of civilized warfare. He had tortured prisoners, executed surrendering enemies, and deliberately caused suffering. By every legal standard, he was a war criminal. And yet you defend his actions? I defend his reasons. Lopez's platoon had been murdered in violation of those same laws you cite. The enemy had broadcast their deaths as psychological warfare. They had turned the killing of prisoners into entertainment. Zethkar's voice grew stronger. Lopez simply returned the favor. But surely there were legal channels, proper procedures for addressing war crimes? After the war, yes. Forms to fill out, investigations to conduct, tribunals to hold, very civilized, very proper, very useless to 36 dead soldiers who would never see justice through legal channels. Zethkar stood one final time, his full height impressive even among the larger tribunal chairs. You ask me about human fury as if it is something uncontrolled, something animal. But what Lopez did was not fury, it was justice. Cold, calculated, personal justice. Is there a difference? Fury burns hot and burns out quickly. Justice burns cold and burns forever. Fury makes mistakes. Justice does not miss. The alien veterans' skin had returned to its normal color, the memory pain fading. Lopez never harmed a civilian, never killed anyone who was not directly responsible for murdering his soldiers. The fourth day of testimony began differently. Commander Zethkar entered the courtroom carrying nothing in his hands, but somehow he seemed to carry more weight than before. The judges noticed that his crystalline skin had taken on a pale, translucent quality that among his people indicated deep sorrow. "Commander," Judge Harquin began gently, "the reports we must discuss today concern the psychological effects of warfare on human soldiers. There are claims that humans suffer from what they call battle trauma, yet continue to fight effectively. Some medical experts consider this evidence of mental illness." Zethkar sat quietly for a moment, his four eyes focused on something the judges could not see. "You want to understand the ghosts that humans carry, the voices they hear from their dead, the dreams that visit them in the darkness." His voice was softer today, like someone speaking in a library or a temple. "Very well. But know that this is sacred ground you asked me to walk on." Judge Veltar leaned forward. "Sacred? The human mind in war is not something to be studied like a machine or analyzed like a tactical problem. It is something to be respected because it carries burdens that would break most species." Zethkar finally looked directly at the tribunal. "I will tell you about Staff Sergeant Alex Morgan and what it costs to be a ghost among ghosts." The alien commander stood, but instead of pacing, he remained perfectly still. Morgan was a reconnaissance specialist, what humans call a scout. His job was to move alone through enemy territory for weeks at a time, gathering intelligence and watching for threats. How long would these missions last? The shortest was 12 days. The longest was 47 days alone behind enemy lines, with no contact with friendly forces, no support, no backup. Just Morgan and whatever he could carry on his back. Judge Nexori made a note. "Surely no soldier can maintain effectiveness for such periods in isolation? That is what I thought too." But Morgan completed 18 solo missions during our time. Together, everyone successful. Every piece of intelligence he gathered was accurate and valuable. He saved thousands of lives with the information he brought back. Zethkar's skin flickered with memory light. But something was wrong with Morgan. I noticed it after his third mission. He would sit alone for hours, staring at nothing. When other soldiers tried to talk to him, he would answer, but it was like he was listening to other voices at the same time. Other voices? The voices of his dead teammates. Morgan had served with the same unit for 3 years before I met him, 12 other humans who had been his family, his brothers and sisters. They had all died in a transport crash 6 months before our first mission together. The alien veteran sat down slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Morgan blamed himself for their deaths. He had been sick with fever that day and could not join the mission. If he had been on that transport, he would have died with them. Instead, he lived and they did not. How did this affect his performance? It made him better at his job and worse at being alive. Zethkar's voice carried a sadness that the translation machines could not quite capture. On missions, Morgan was perfect. He could move through enemy territory like he was invisible. He could remember every detail, every guard rotation, every weakness in their defenses. But when he came back to base, he was like a man carrying the weight of 13 deaths. Judge Veltar looked confused. 13 deaths? You said 12 teammates died. 12 teammates and himself. Morgan had died in that crash too, in every way that mattered to him. His body kept walking and breathing and fighting, but his spirit had gone with his friends. Zethkar's 4 hands clasped together. I learned this from watching him during quiet moments. What did you observe? Morgan would set up his equipment for 13 people instead of 1. 13 sleeping bags, 13 meal portions, 13 weapons checks. When I asked him about it, he said old habits were hard to break. But I saw him talking to empty spaces around the campfire, having conversations with people who were not. There, the judges exchanged concerned glances. This sounded like severe mental illness. You think Morgan was insane, Zethkar said, reading their expressions. That is what I thought too at first. But then I began to listen to what he was saying during these conversations. What was he saying? He was reporting to his dead sergeant, telling him about the mission, about what he had seen, about the dangers ahead. He was asking his dead medic for advice about treating wounds. He was joking with his dead friends about the bad food and cold weather. Zethkar stood again, this time walking to the window that showed the human ships in the distance. Morgan was not insane. He was keeping his team alive the only way he could. In his mind, in his heart, they were still with him, still helping him complete missions, still protecting each other. But surely this affected his judgment, his ability to function. It made his judgment perfect. Morgan never made a mistake on any mission because he had 12 other minds helping him think through every decision. He would pause before crossing dangerous ground and seem to listen to advice that only he could hear. Then he would choose a different route, one that avoided ambush or patrols. The alien commander turned back to face the tribunal. I began to understand that humans do not just carry equipment and weapons into battle. They carry their dead. With them, every soldier who has died becomes part of every soldier who lives. Judge Harquin made a careful note. Please, continue. I will tell you about Captain Greg Foster and what humans call survivor's guilt. Foster had commanded a company of 120 soldiers during the Battle of 7 Moons. Only Foster survived. How is that possible? Orbital bombardment. The enemy fleet appeared without warning and began destroying everything on the surface. Foster's company was caught in the open with no shelter, no air support, no chance of escape. Zethkar's skin darkened again with memory pain. Foster watched his entire command die in the space of 30 minutes. What happened to him after this? Foster requested immediate transfer to the most dangerous assignments available. Suicide missions, desperate assaults, reconnaissance into areas where survival was unlikely. He volunteered for everything. Zethkar sat down again, his movements showing the weight of remembering. Foster said he was the wrong person to survive 7 moons. He said better soldiers had died while he lived, and he needed to balance the equation. Balance the equation? Make himself worthy of being the one who lived. He believed that if he could save enough other people, if he could complete enough dangerous missions, maybe the universe would forgive him for surviving when his soldiers did not. Judge Nixori looked troubled. Did he succeed in these dangerous missions? Everyone. Foster became legendary for completing impossible tasks and bringing everyone home alive. But he never brought himself home. Part of him stayed on 7 moons. With his dead company, and no amount of heroism could bring that part back. The alien commander's voice grew even softer. Then there was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake. Blake had been captured by the hegemony and held for 2 months. When she escaped, the medical reports showed evidence of systematic torture, physical and psychological. How did she respond to this treatment? Blake returned to duty immediately. Said she was fine, ready to fight, needed to get back to work. But fine was not the right word for what Blake had become. Zethkar walked to a different window, one that showed the repair docks where damaged ships waited for healing. Blake never slept for more than 2 hours at a time. She would wake up fighting invisible enemies, calling out warnings about threats that were not there. During the day, she would unconsciously touch the scars on her arms and legs, reminding herself that she was real, that she was free. Did she receive treatment for these symptoms? Human military medicine tried to help her. Therapy, medication, rest periods. But Blake refused most treatment. She said the symptoms kept her alert, kept her ready for the next attack. She said forgetting the pain would dishonor what she had survived. The alien veteran returned to his chair but remained standing behind it. Blake became one of our most effective interrogators because she understood what the enemy was capable of. She could break hegemony prisoners in hours because she knew exactly what they feared most. Her trauma became a weapon. Judge Veltar looked uncomfortable. These examples suggest severe psychological damage. How can such soldiers be considered fit for duty? Because they choose to be fit for duty. Every day, every hour, they choose to keep functioning despite carrying unbearable weight. Zethkar's 4 eyes fixed on each judge in turn. Morgan chose to carry his dead friends with him rather than abandon them to silence. Foster chose to risk everything to save others rather than accept that survival was random. Blake chose to use her pain as strength rather than let it destroy her. But surely there must be limits to what the human mind can endure? I thought so too, until I met Corporal Janet Price. Zethkar finally sat down, his full weight settling into the chair. Price had lost her parents in the war, her brother in a different battle, and her fiancé in a training accident. She had buried everyone she loved before her 22nd birthday. How did she continue to function? Price said that grief was like carrying a heavy pack. You could set it down for a while, but eventually you had to pick it up and keep walking. The 5th day brought clear skies to the space station. Sunlight streamed through the courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Commander Zethkar entered carrying a single item, a small metal disc that caught the light as he walked. He placed it carefully on the witness table and sat down for the final time. Commander, Judge Harquin began, we have heard 4 days of testimony about human combat methods. Today we must reach a decision. The question before this tribunal is simple. Should humanity be banned from participating in galactic warfare due to their methods and psychological state? Zethkar picked up the metal disc and held it in his palm. The judges could see that it was some kind of military decoration, old and worn from handling. You want me to give you a simple answer to a complex question? You want me to tell you whether humans are too dangerous, too brutal, too damaged to be trusted with war? That is correct. Then I will give you the truth. But the truth is not simple, and it is not what you expect. The alien commander stood and walked to the center of the room, where everyone could see him clearly. The truth is that humans are guilty of everything you suspect and innocent of everything you fear. Judge Veltar looked confused. Please explain. Humans are guilty of fighting beyond normal limits. They are guilty of enduring pain that would break other species. They are guilty of carrying psychological wounds that would disable most soldiers. They are guilty of turning grief into weapons and love into fury. Zethkar's crystalline skin began to glow with warm light. But they are innocent of cruelty for its own sake. They are innocent of enjoying the suffering of others. They are innocent of fighting for conquest or glory. The alien veteran held up the metal disc so all could see it. This belonged to Sergeant Troy Phillips. He gave it to me 3 hours before he died protecting an evacuation transport full of Vorthak civilians. Children, mostly. Phillips had never seen a Vorthak child before that day. What did he say when he gave it to you? He said it was his father's medal from an earlier war. He said his father had told him that some things were worth dying for, even if you had never met the people you were saving. Zethkar's voice carried across the quiet courtroom. Phillips burned this metal into my skin with a plasma torch so I would always remember what he taught me. Judge Nexori leaned forward. What did he teach you? That humans do not fight because they love war. They fight because they love peace. They do not kill because they enjoy death. They kill because they cannot bear to watch innocents suffer. The alien commander began to pace, but his movements were different today. Stronger. More purposeful. Phillips died holding the docking bay doors closed while hegemony soldiers tried to break through. He saved 400 Vorthik civilians, including 60 children under the age of 5. How did he die? Plasma fire through the chest. But he held those doors for another 10 minutes after he was mortally wounded, long enough for the transport to escape, long enough for those children to live. Zethkar stopped pacing and faced the tribunal directly. Phillips had met those children 30 minutes before he died. 30 minutes was enough for him to decide they were worth his life. The judges sat in silence, absorbing this information. You want to know about war crimes? Zethkar's voice grew stronger. I will tell you about Captain Linda Ross and the choice she made at Firebase 7. Ross was ordered to evacuate her position when enemy artillery began targeting the base. Standard procedure. Save the able-bodied soldiers and abandon the wounded who could not be moved. Did she follow orders? Ross told her commanding officer that no one gets left behind. Then she cut communications and began organizing the evacuation of 37 wounded soldiers, including 4 of my own people who had been too badly injured to move. Zethkar walked to the window and looked out at the human ships waiting in the distance. The artillery bombardment began while Ross was carrying the last wounded Vorthek to the evacuation zone. She could have left him and saved herself. Her duty was complete. Her orders were to preserve her own life for future missions. What did she do? Ross stayed with that wounded soldier, covered his body with her own when the shells began falling, held his hand and spoke to him in broken Vorthok while the world exploded around them. The alien commander's skin flickered with memory light. She told him that humans had a promise. No one fights alone. No one dies alone. No one gets left behind. Did she survive? No, Ross died in that bombardment, still holding the hand of a soldier she had known for less than an hour. But that Vorthek lived. He lives today because a human decided that a stranger's life was worth more than her. Oh. Zethkar turned back to face the judges. That soldier was my nephew. The silence in the courtroom was complete. You asked me to judge humanity based on their methods of war. But you cannot understand their methods without understanding their reasons. Zethkar returned to the witness table and sat down, still holding the metal disc. Humans do not fight the way other species fight. They do not calculate odds and accept losses. They do not retreat when logic says they should. They do not abandon positions when they become untenable. Judge Harquin made a note. Why not? Because humans believe that every life has infinite value, not just human lives, all lives. They will risk everything to save anyone, even enemies who have surrendered, even civilians from species they have never encountered before. The alien veteran's voice carried a weight of absolute conviction. I have seen humans die protecting hegemony prisoners from their own allies' revenge. I have seen them share food with enemy wounded while their own soldiers went hungry. But we have also heard testimony about human brutality, about systematic elimination of enemy forces. Yes, humans can be brutal beyond imagination when they face enemies who threaten innocence. But their brutality is not random or sadistic. It is precise and purposeful. Zethkar held up the metal disc again. Sergeant Kevin Lopez killed 47 enemy soldiers at Darkwater Base, but he did not kill the 3 hegemony medics who were treating wounded prisoners. He did not kill the communication officer who was only 18 years old and crying for his mother. How do you know this? Because I reviewed the security recordings after the battle. Lopez had opportunities to kill everyone in that base, but he chose his targets carefully. Only those who had participated in the execution of his soldiers. Only those who had chosen cruelty over duty. Zethkar's crystalline skin began to glow. Brighter. Even in his fury, even in his grief, Lopez remembered the difference between justice and murder. Judge Veltar looked uncomfortable. Are you saying that human war crimes are justified? I'm saying that human war crimes are human. They come from love, not hate, from protection, not conquest, from a refusal to accept that some people matter more than others. The alien commander stood one final time. Every human I fought beside was broken in some way, traumatized, grieving, carrying impossible burdens. But they chose to use their brokenness as strength instead of weakness. What do you recommend to this tribunal? Zethkar walked to the center of the room and turned. To face each judge, I recommend that you do exactly what humanity has been asking for since this war began. Give them the most dangerous missions. Send them to the places where other species cannot or will not go. Let them fight the battles that have no good solutions. Why? Because humans do not fight to win, they fight to save. They do not seek glory or territory or revenge. They seek to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The alien veteran's voice filled the courtroom. If you ban humanity from galactic warfare, you will have peace. But you will also have a universe where the strong prey on the weak without consequence. And if we allow them to continue fighting, you will have a universe where bullies fear the dark, where tyrants sleep poorly, where anyone who threatens innocence must face the possibility that somewhere a human is coming for them. Zethkar's skin reached its brightest glow. You will have a universe where no one fights alone. The alien commander placed the metal disc on the table and stepped back. Phillips told me something else before he died. He said that humans had learned something important during their own history of war. He said that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. What does that mean? It means that humans have chosen to be the people who do something, always, even when it costs everything. Even when it breaks them, even when the galaxy judges them for their methods. Zethkar walked toward the door for the final time. You want to know if humans are guilty of war crimes? Yes, but they are guilty of war crimes in defense of peace, not in pursuit of conquest. He paused at the threshold and looked back at the three judges. The choice before you is simple. Do you want a galaxy where humans fight for you, or a galaxy where you must fight without them? What is your recommendation? Designate humanity as protected allies. Any attack on human colonies or ships should be considered an act of war against the entire Galactic Federation. Not because they need protection, but because the galaxy needs them protected. Zethkar's final words carried the weight of absolute certainty. The universe is a dark and dangerous place. Humans are the light that keeps the darkness from swallowing everything we love. The door closed behind him, leaving the judges alone with their decision.